The Texas sky had been brewing trouble all morning, painting itself in shades of bruised purple and angry gray. Sofia Morales pressed her face against the passenger window of her uncle's pickup truck, watching the vast plains of Brewster County stretch endlessly toward the horizon. At 17, she'd never seen land so empty, so different from the crowded streets of Juarez, where she'd grown up. "Mira, Sofia," her uncle Miguel said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. "Cedar Creek. Our new home." Sofia nodded, though the word home felt strange on her tongue. 3 months ago, she'd been a high school student dreaming of college. Now she was an undocumented immigrant, her future as uncertain as the storm clouds gathering overhead. The truck's radio crackled with weather warnings. Double quotes, ... Severe thunderstorm watch, in effect for Brewster and surrounding counties. Winds up to 70 miles per hour expected, with possible tornadoes, ... Miguel reached over and squeezed Sofia's hand. "Don't worry, Mia. Tomorrow we start fresh. I have work lined up at the Morrison Ranch, and you'll finish school here. Everything will be okay." But as the first fat raindrops splattered against the windshield, Sofia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. 20 miles away, Jake Morrison stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the same storm approach. At 55, his weathered face showed the lines of a man who'd spent too many years squinting into the Texas sun and too many nights staring at empty rooms. The Morrison Ranch had been in his family for 4 generations, but for the past 3 years, since the accident, Jake had worked it alone. The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds skittering across his yard. Jake's border collie, Scout, whined and pressed against his legs. "I know, boy," Jake murmured, scratching the dog's ears. "Feels different this time, doesn't it?" His phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor. "Mrs. Henderson, storm's looking bad. Jake, you need anything? You called?" Jake typed back a quick thanks, but he knew he wouldn't call. He hadn't called anyone for help in 3 years. Not since the day Sarah and Emma had left for town and never came back. The drunk driver who'd hit their car had walked away without a scratch, while Jake's wife and 8-year-old daughter. Jake shook his head, forcing the memories back into their familiar dark corner. By evening, the storm had intensified beyond anyone's predictions. Sofia huddled in the passenger seat as Miguel fought to keep the truck on the rain-slicked highway. The windshield wipers struggled against sheets of water, and the radio had given up trying to broadcast through the static. "There," Miguel shouted, over the wind, "I see lights. We can wait it out at that gas station." But as they pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's General Store, a massive oak tree, uprooted by the howling wind, came crashing down across the highway behind them. The impact shook the ground, and Sofia screamed as another tree fell across the road ahead, trapping them in the small parking lot with 3 other vehicles. Inside the store, old Murphy handed out flashlights and bottled water to the stranded travelers. "Phones are down," he announced grimly. "And that's the only road in or out for 20 miles. We're stuck here until morning, assuming this blows over." Sofia and Miguel huddled together on a bench near the back of the store, sharing a bag of chips and listening to the storm rage outside. Around midnight, the sound changed to a deep, rumbling roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Tornado," Murphy whispered, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. Everyone dove for cover as the store shuddered and groaned. Sofia felt Miguel's arms around her, heard him whispering prayers in Spanish. And then ... silence. When they emerged, the world had changed. The tornado hadn't hit the store directly, but it had carved a devastating path just north of them. In the distance, they could see the scattered remains of what had been a small farmhouse. Its pieces spread across the prairie like broken toys. As dawn broke gray and cold, rescue workers began arriving. Sofia stood beside the truck, watching Miguel talk to a sheriff's deputy, when she heard the words that would haunt her forever. ... Identification found at the scene, Miguel Morales. I'm sorry, sir, but it appears your truck was caught in the tornado's path. Were you traveling with anyone? Sofia's world tilted. She watched Miguel's face crumple as the deputy continued talking, but the words seemed to come from very far away. There had been another truck, Miguel's friend, Carlos, who was supposed to meet them in town. Carlos, his wife Maria, and their 2 young children. They'd been traveling just ahead of Miguel and Sofia when the storm hit. They were family, Miguel sobbed. And Sofia realized that the only other people in the world who'd known she existed were gone. Her parents had died in a factory fire in Juarez 2 years ago. Carlos and Maria had been like second parents to her, had helped Miguel plan her dangerous journey north. Their children had been like little siblings. Now, standing in the wreckage. Of her second chance, Sophia understood that she was truly alone in the world. Miguel aged 10 years in the span of that morning. The deputy was kind, but firm there would be investigations. Paperwork, questions about documentation that Miguel couldn't answer. By noon, he was in the back of a patrol car, heading to an immigration detention center in El Paso. "I'll come back for you," he called through the window. "I promise, Mia. I'll find a way." Sophia nodded and waved, but they both knew the truth. Miguel had been living undocumented for 15 years. His chances of quick release were slim, and his chances of being able to return for her were even slimmer. As the patrol car disappeared down the highway, Sophia found herself standing alone beside the damaged general store, clutching a small backpack containing everything she owned in the world: 2 changes of clothes, her mother's rosary, and $47 in crumpled bills. Murphy emerged from his store, surveying the damage to his roof. He was a kind man, but Sophia could see the calculation in his eyes. She was a liability now, a problem he couldn't afford. "Listen, girl," he said gently. "I called social services, but with the storm damage, it might be a day or two before anyone can get out here. You got somewhere to go?" "Family." Sophia shook her head, not trusting her voice. Murphy sighed and glanced at his watch. "I can let you stay here tonight, but after that, ... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As the sun set on what should have been her first day in Cedar Creek, Sophia sat on the store's front step, watching traffic slowly resume on the cleared highway. Cars passed by, their occupants staring curiously at the storm damage, but no one stopped. She was invisible now, she realized. Just another casualty of the storm, another problem for someone else to solve. The American dream that had sustained her through the dangerous border crossing and the fearful weeks of hiding now seemed as distant as the stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky. Sophia pulled her mother's rosary from her pocket and whispered a prayer, though she wasn't sure anyone was listening anymore. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to survive in a country where she didn't officially exist, in a language that still felt foreign on her tongue, with nothing but her wits and the $47 in her pocket. The storm had passed, but for Sophia Morales, the real struggle was just beginning. The stranger's kindness. Jake Morrison woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 3 years. The routine was sacred. Now coffee, check the weather, feed the cattle, lose himself in work until exhaustion made sleep possible. But this morning was different. This morning, the silence that usually surrounded his ranch was broken by the distant sound of sirens and the rumble of emergency vehicles on the highway. Scout paced nervously by the door as Jake stepped onto his porch. The storm had left its mark everywhere: broken fence posts, scattered debris, and a strange orange glow on the horizon that spoke of fires still burning somewhere to the south. His phone, miraculously working again after the night's outage, buzzed with missed calls and messages. The first voicemail was from his foreman, Pete. "Boss, I'm stuck in town. Roads blocked by fallen trees, and my truck's got a busted windshield. Gonna be at least a day before I can get out to the ranch." Jake wasn't surprised. Pete lived in Cedar Creek, 15 miles away, and the storm had hit that area particularly hard. He scrolled through the other messages: neighbors checking on him, his insurance agent asking about damage, his sister in Dallas worried about the news reports she'd seen. He was deleting the messages when one caught his attention. It was from Sheriff Martinez. "Jake, I know you keep to yourself, but we could use some help. Storm hit Murphy's store pretty hard, and we've got some folks stranded out there. Could you swing by with your truck? Road's clear now." Jake stared at the message for a long moment. His first instinct was to delete it, to pretend he'd never seen it. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's problems only led to heartache. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the memory of all the times neighbors had shown up after Sarah and Emma died, bringing casseroles and offering help he'd been too proud to accept. 20 minutes later, Jake was driving his heavy-duty pickup toward Murphy's general store, Scout riding shotgun and eyeing his master with what looked like approval. The road was littered with debris, but his truck handled it easily. He'd made this drive 1,000 times over the years, but today the familiar landscape looked alien, rearranged by the storm's violence. Murphy's store sat in a pocket of relative calm, though Jake could see the damaged roof and the scattered merchandise. In the parking lot, several cars were still there, their owners presumably waiting for rides or dealing with insurance adjusters. As Jake pulled up, he noticed a slight figure sitting on the front steps, a young woman with long dark hair, hunched over something in her hands. "Jake Morrison." Murphy emerged from the store, relief evident on his weathered face. Thank God. Sheriff said you might be able to help with some transportation issues. Jake nodded, but his attention was drawn to the girl on the steps. She was young, maybe 17 or 18. Everything about her posture spoke of exhaustion and defeat. She looked up as he approached, and he was struck by her eyes, dark brown and filled with a wariness that seemed too old for her face. This is Sophia, Murphy said, lowering his voice. She was traveling with her uncle when the storm hit. Family got ... well, they got caught in the tornado. Uncle's been taken to El Paso for legal issues. She's got nowhere to go. Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had whenever Sarah brought home stray animals or wanted to help someone in need. He'd learned to ignore that feeling, to walk away from complications that might reopen old wounds. Social services, he asked. Murphy shook his head. Backlogged with storm victims. Could be days, maybe weeks. And well, her situation's complicated. Jake understood. Undocumented, probably. In this part of Texas, it wasn't uncommon, and it wasn't his business to judge. But it did make things more complicated. Sophia stood up as the two men talked, and Jake could see her trying to make herself invisible, to become just another piece of storm debris that could be swept away without notice. She clutched a small backpack and what looked like a rosary, and Jake noticed the way her hands shook despite her efforts to appear composed. I don't want to be trouble, she said suddenly, her English accented but clear. I can ... I can find somewhere else. There was dignity in her voice, a pride that reminded Jake of his own stubborn independence. But there was also fear, barely controlled, and all the more heartbreaking for being hidden. Jake found himself thinking of Emma, of the way his daughter had always championed the underdog, the way she'd cried when they passed roadkill and celebrated when they rescued baby birds that had fallen from their nests. Emma had inherited Sarah's compassionate heart, and both of them would have been appalled at the idea of leaving this girl to fend for herself. You got family somewhere? Jake asked Sophia directly. She shook her head. My uncle ... he's all I had. And she gestured helplessly toward the highway, toward El Paso and the detention center that might as well be on another planet. Jake looked at Murphy, who shrugged apologetically. I'd help if I could, Jake, but with the store damage and my wife in the hospital for her hip surgery, I just can't take on any more right now. The rational part of Jake's mind screamed warnings. Getting involved would mean complications, questions, responsibilities he wasn't equipped to handle. He'd built his life around avoiding exactly this kind of situation. But as he looked at Sophia, really looked at her, he saw something that made his chest ache with recognition. She was trying so hard to be strong, to not let her terror show, and it reminded him of Emma, after Sarah's funeral, putting on a brave face even as her world fell apart. You hungry? He found himself asking. Sophia blinked in surprise. Yes, sir, Jake, he corrected automatically. Come on, let's get some breakfast, and we'll figure out what comes next. Sophia looked uncertain, glancing between Jake and Murphy, as if waiting for someone to reveal that this was a joke or a trap. I don't have much money, she said quietly. Did I ask about money? Jake's voice was gruffer than he intended, but Sophia seemed to relax rather than flinch. Maybe she was used to gruff kindness. Murphy looked relieved as Jake loaded Sophia's meager belongings into his truck. I'll let Sheriff Martinez know you're handling this, he said. And Jake ... thanks. I know this isn't easy for you. Jake didn't respond. Nothing had been easy for him in 3 years. One more complication wouldn't change that. The drive to Cedar Creek was quiet, except for the rumble of the engine and the occasional whine from Scout, who kept turning around to sniff at their passenger. Sophia sat rigidly in the corner of the bench seat, her backpack clutched in her lap, staring out at the storm-damaged landscape. It looks different than I imagined, she said softly, as they passed a cluster of damaged buildings. What did you imagine? Sophia was quiet for so long that Jake thought she wasn't going to answer. Finally, she said, green. In the movies, America is always so green. But this ... She gestured at the brown plains, stretching to the horizon. This is beautiful too, but different. Harder. Jake found himself thinking about that observation as they pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, one of the few restaurants in Cedar Creek that had apparently weathered the storm without major damage. He hadn't really looked at this landscape in years, had stopped seeing it as anything but the backdrop to his daily routine. But Sophia was right, it was hard country, unforgiving and demanding respect. Inside the diner, Rosie herself approached their table, her usual smile faltering slightly when she saw Sophia. Jake could practically read her thoughts. New face. Hispanic. Traveling with Jake Morrison, who never talked to anyone. The gossip mill would be working overtime before they finished their coffee. Morning, Jake, Rosie said carefully. Y'all doing okay after that storm? Fine, Jake replied. We'll take 2 breakfast specials and coffee. Sophia started to protest. I can just have 2 breakfast specials, Jake repeated firmly. When Rosie left, Sophia fidgeted with her napkin. You don't have to do this. I can take care of myself. Can you? Jake's question wasn't unkind, just direct. 17 years old, no family, no papers, $40-something in your pocket, in a town where you don't know anybody. Sophia's cheeks flushed. How did you lucky guess? Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her. Look, I'm not trying to embarrass you, but let's be honest about the situation. You need help, and for reasons I can't entirely explain, I'm offering it. Question is, are you smart enough to accept it? Sophia met his eyes then, and Jake saw the exact moment when her pride wrestled with her desperation and lost. What do you want in return? The question hit Jake like a physical blow. He thought of all the ways people could exploit a vulnerable young woman, and his jaw tightened with anger, not at Sophia for asking, but at the world that had taught her she needed to. Nothing, he said quietly. I want nothing in return, except maybe someone to talk to while I drink my coffee. When their food arrived, Jake watched Sophia try to eat slowly, with dignity. Even though it was obvious she was starving, she answered his careful questions between bites. She'd been a good student in Juarez, had dreamed of studying engineering, spoke 3 languages, including some German she'd learned from a teacher who'd emigrated from Bavaria. Smart, Jake observed. Too smart to be washing dishes in some kitchen for the rest of your life. Sophia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Beggars can't be choosers. Maybe not, but dreamers can still dream. After breakfast, Jake sat in his truck for a long moment, staring at the diner's door and wrestling with a decision that could change everything. Sophia waited patiently beside him, and he could feel her tension, her uncertainty about what came next. Finally, he started the engine. I've got a ranch about 20 miles from here, he said without looking at her. It's not much, but it's quiet, and there's plenty of room. You can stay until you figure out your next move. Sophia was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why? Jake thought about Emma, about Sarah, about all the ways his life had become smaller and lonelier since they'd died. He thought about the empty rooms in his house, the silence that had become his only companion, and the slow death of hope that came from having no one to care about. Because, he said simply, sometimes helping someone else is the only way to help yourself. As they drove toward the Morrison Ranch, Sophia watched the landscape change from storm-damaged buildings to open prairie, from the scars of civilization to the raw beauty of untamed land. For the first time since the storm, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. Maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this after all. Finding ground, the Morrison Ranch unfolded before Sophia like a scene from a Western movie. Old, weathered wood and endless sky. The main house sat on a small rise, surrounded by sprawling pastures, where cattle grazed in the distance. Everything looked solid, permanent, as if it had grown from the Texas earth itself. Been in my family since 1892, Jake said, as they drove up the gravel driveway. My great-great-grandfather bought it with money he made driving cattle to Kansas. Sophia nodded, taking in the details: the wide front porch with its wooden swing, the barn that looked freshly painted despite its old-fashioned design, the vegetable garden that was clearly tended with care. It was the kind of place she'd imagined when she dreamed of America, but never thought she'd actually see. Scout bounded out of the truck as soon as Jake opened the door, racing in circles around the yard before returning to sniff cautiously at Sophia. She held out her hand, letting the dog catch her scent, and was rewarded with a tentative tail wag. He likes you, Jake observed. That's a good sign. Scout's usually suspicious of strangers. The inside of the house was neat but sparse, decorated with the kind of practical furniture that was built to last rather than impress. Sophia noticed the family photos on the mantelpiece, Jake, with a beautiful blonde woman and a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. The photos stopped abruptly, as if time itself had ended at some specific moment. Your family? Sophia asked gently. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Was my wife Sarah and my daughter Emma. They died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Sophia meant them. She recognized the particular kind of grief that lived in Jake's voice, the same tone her uncle Miguel had used when he talked about her parents. Jake showed her to a small bedroom at the back of the house. It was simply furnished with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the pastures. The walls were painted pale yellow, and there were glow-and-thawed stars stuck to the ceiling. "This was Emma's room," Jake said quietly. I mean, I can get you set up somewhere else if it's perfect." Sophia interrupted. "Thank you." That first week passed in a strange kind of suspension. Sophia woke each morning wondering if this was the day Jake would change his mind, would tell her it was time to move on. But each morning he was there at the kitchen table, reading the weather report on his phone, and drinking coffee from a mug that said "World's Best Dad" in faded letters. Their conversations were careful, polite, like two people sharing an elevator, who weren't sure how long the ride would last. Jake would ask if she slept well, if she needed anything from town. Sophia would offer to help with chores, to earn her keep somehow, and Jake would wave off her suggestions with a gruff, "Just focus on getting your feet under you." But Sophia was not the kind of person who could sit idle. On the third day, while Jake was out checking fence lines, she cleaned the entire house from top to bottom. She found the laundry room and washed the clothes she'd been wearing, along with several loads of Jake's work clothes that had been piling up. She made lunch and had it waiting when he came back, tired and dusty from a morning of repairs. Jake stood in the doorway of his transformed kitchen, staring at the spotless counters and the sandwich waiting on the table, as if he'd walked into the wrong house. "You didn't need to do this," he said. "I wanted to." Sophia stood by the sink, suddenly nervous. I need to do something useful." Jake sat down heavily and took a bite of the sandwich. Sophia had found ham and cheese in the refrigerator, but she'd also added tomatoes from the garden and some kind of seasoning that made the simple meal taste like something special. "It's good," he said, and Sophia felt a flutter of pride that surprised her with its intensity. "My mother taught me to cook," she said. "She said that food was love you could taste." Jake nodded slowly. "Sarah used to say something like that." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife's name without flinching, and Sophia sensed that something had shifted between them. Some wall had been lowered just slightly. The days began to take on a rhythm. Jake would leave early to work the ranch, and Sophia would clean, cook, and gradually begin to explore her surroundings. She discovered that the vegetable garden had been neglected. Weeds were choking out the tomatoes, and the herbs had grown wild and leggy. Without asking permission, she began to restore it. Working in the early morning coolness, before the Texas heat became unbearable, she found peace in the work, in the feeling of dirt under her fingernails, and the satisfaction of bringing order to chaos. It reminded her of helping her mother in their small garden behind their house in Juarez, before the factory fire, before everything changed. One morning, Jake came back from feeding the cattle to find Sophia kneeling in the garden, carefully transplanting basil seedlings she'd started from seeds she'd found in the kitchen. "You know what you're doing," he observed. Sophia looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. "My mother, she grew up on a farm in Chihuahua. She taught me that plants are like people, they need the right conditions to thrive, but they're tougher than they look." Jake crouched down beside her, examining her work. The garden already looked more organized, more purposeful. "These herbs, you planning to use them, if that's okay? I thought, maybe I could cook dinner sometimes. Real dinner, not just sandwiches." That evening, Sophia prepared her first real meal in the Morrison kitchen: chicken, with herbs from the garden, rice seasoned with cumin and garlic, and fresh salsa made from the tomatoes she'd rescued from the weeds. Jake ate in silence, but Sophia noticed that he cleaned his plate and even went back for seconds. "Haven't had a meal like this since ... double quotes he started, then stopped himself. "Since your wife cooked for you," Sophia finished gently. Jake nodded, and Sophia saw something raw and vulnerable flash across his face before he composed himself again. "Sarah was a good cook, but this is different. The flavors ... they're brighter somehow. My grandmother's recipes. She always said that food should make you remember that you're alive." After dinner, they sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Scout lay at their feet, occasionally opening one eye to check on them before returning to his doze. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said eventually. Jake tensed slightly. "Depends on the question. Why did you help me? Really? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And I know it's not because you're lonely for company." Jake was quiet for so long that Sophia thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "The night Emma was born, Sarah made me promise something. She said that our daughter would grow up in a world that could be cruel and unfair, especially to women, especially to people who were different or vulnerable. She made me promise that if I ever had the chance to be the kind of person who helped, instead of walking away, I would take it." He paused, staring out at the darkening sky. "After they died, I forgot about that promise. I was so angry, so hurt, that I stopped caring about anyone or anything beyond this ranch. But when I saw you sitting on those steps, looking so determined not to cry, I remembered." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. "They would be proud of you. Maybe. Or maybe they'd wonder what took me so long." The next morning, Sophia woke to find Jake sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop computer and a stack of papers. "We need to talk about your situation," he said without preamble. Sophia's stomach clenched. This was it. Then, the end of the brief respite, the return to uncertainty and fear. "I've been doing some research," Jake continued. "There are programs, legal ways for someone in your situation to get documentation. It's complicated, and it takes time, but it's possible." Sophia stared at him. "I don't understand. Special visas for victims of crimes, humanitarian programs, pathways to permanent residency. It's not guaranteed, but with the right lawyer, the right documentation of what happened to your family in the tornado, ... Jake looked up from his papers. "There are options. I can't afford a lawyer, maybe not, but I can." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Sophia was afraid to examine too closely. "Why would you do that?" Jake closed the laptop and looked at her directly. "Because in the past 2 weeks, this house has felt more like a home than it has in 3 years. Because you've brought something back that I thought was gone forever. And because everyone deserves a chance to build a life, to have dreams that might actually come true." Sophia felt the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You just need to let me help." That afternoon, Jake drove Sophia into town to meet with Maria Santos, a lawyer who specialized in immigration cases. The meeting was encouraging but sobering. Process would take months, maybe years, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time since the storm, Sophia felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. On the drive home, Jake stopped at the local high school. "I talked to the principal yesterday," he said. "They have a program for students in unusual circumstances. You could finish your senior year here, get your diploma." Sophia stared at the brick building with its American flag flying in the breeze. "You really think it's possible? That I could have a normal life here?" "I think," Jake said carefully, "that normal is overrated. But a life where you get to choose your own future, that's worth fighting for." That evening, Sophia called Jake from the garden where she was harvesting vegetables for dinner. "Jake, could you come here for a minute?" He found her standing among the tomato plants, holding something in her cupped hands. "Look," she said, opening her palms to reveal a tiny bird with a broken wing. "I found it by the fence. I think it fell from its nest." Jake examined the bird carefully. "Might be able to save it, but it'll need care. Feeding every few hours, keeping it warm." "I can do that," Sophia said immediately. "If you don't mind me keeping it in my room." Jake looked at the girl holding the broken bird with such gentle determination, and felt something shift in his chest, some frozen place beginning to thaw. "Emma used to rescue birds," he said quietly. "Sarah always said it was a sign of a kind heart." Sophia smiled, the first truly joyful smile he'd seen from her. "Then I'm in good company." As they walked back to the house together, Jake realized that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, without either of them quite noticing, they had stopped being strangers sharing space and started being something else. Something that felt surprisingly like family. Home ground 3 months later, Sophia stood in the bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her new school uniform, a simple white blouse and navy skirt that Jake had insisted on buying, despite her protests about the expense. Today was her first day at Cedar Creek High School, and her stomach was a tangle of nerves and excitement. The little bird she'd rescued, now named Esperanza, chirped from her cage by the window. The bird's wing had healed perfectly, but she'd grown so tame that Sophia couldn't bring herself to release her. Jake had built an elaborate aviary in the garden, where Esperanza could fly freely while still being protected from predators. "Ready for this?" Jake asked from the kitchen doorway. Sophia took a deep breath. "I think so. The English placement test went well, and Mrs. Martinez said the other students are excited to meet me." Jake nodded, but Sophia could see the worry in his eyes. They both knew that high school could be brutal for someone who was different. And Sophia would be different in multiple ways: immigrant, older than most seniors, living with a man who wasn't. Family in a small town, where everyone knew everyone's business. The gossip had started. Almost immediately after Sophia's first public appearance at the lawyer's office, Jake Morrison, the hermit rancher who hadn't been seen in town for months at a time, suddenly had a young Hispanic woman living with him. The speculation ranged from merely inappropriate to downright scandalous. Jake had handled it with characteristic directness. When Rosie at the diner made a snide comment about his houseguest, he'd simply said, "Sophia is a family friend who needed help after the storm. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Word had gotten around quickly after that. Jake Morrison might be a recluse, but he was also 6'2", built like someone who'd spent his life doing physical labor, and had the kind of steady, no-nonsense demeanor that discouraged casual confrontation. Still, Sophia knew that high school students were a different animal entirely. The drive to school was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Sophia clutched her new backpack and other of Jake's purchases that she'd initially protested and reviewed her class schedule for the 10th time. Advanced English, AP History, Chemistry, Calculus, and Spanish as a native speaker, which the counselor had suggested would be an easy aid to balance her course load. "Remember," Jake said as they pulled into the school parking lot, "if anyone gives you trouble, I call you immediately." Sophia finished. They'd had this conversation several times over the past week. "And if you need anything at all, I call." Jake put the truck in park and turned to look at her. "I know this is scary. New schools are hard for anyone, and your situation is complicated. But you're smart, Sophia. Smarter than most of these kids will ever be. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong here." Sophia nodded. Though they both suspected that belonging would be easier said than done. The first half of the day went better than expected. Her teachers were supportive, clearly briefed on her situation, and prepared to help her succeed. Her classmates were politely curious, but not hostile. Few even seemed genuinely friendly. It was at lunch that things got complicated. Sophia was sitting alone at a corner table, reviewing notes for her afternoon chemistry test, when 3 girls approached. She recognized them from her morning classes, popular girls with expensive clothes, and the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to question their place in the world. "You're Sophia, right?" The apparent leader was a blonde named Jessica, whose father owned the largest car dealership in the county, the one staying with Jake Morrison. Sophia looked up from her notes. "Yes. That's so interesting," Jessica continued, her voice carrying just enough volume to attract attention from nearby tables. "I mean, it's so generous of him to take in what did my dad call it? A charity case." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. "Jake has been very kind." "Oh, I'm sure he has." Another girl chimed in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It must be nice, having someone take care of all your expenses. New clothes, school supplies, legal fees. I heard my mom talking about it at the beauty salon." Sophia realized that the cafeteria had grown quieter. Other students tuning in to the conversation with the kind of predatory interest that teenagers showed for potential drama. "Jake is helping me get on my feet after my family died in the storm," Sophia said quietly. "I'm grateful for his kindness." "Kindness," Jessica repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what we're calling it? Because my mom says it's pretty unusual for a man to take in a teenage girl who's not related to him, especially a man who's been alone for so long." The implication hung in the air like smoke, toxic and choking. Sophia felt the eyes of the entire cafeteria on her, felt the weight of whispers and assumptions that would follow her through these halls for months to come. But then she thought of Jacob, the way he'd carefully avoided any situation that might be misconstrued, of how he'd insisted on having Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch present whenever the lawyer came to the house, of the respectful distance he maintained even as he opened his home and his heart to help her. Sophia stood up slowly, gathering her books with deliberate calm. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear enough to carry across the silent cafeteria. "Jake Morrison is the most honorable man I've ever met," she said. "He opened his home to a stranger because it was the right thing to do, not because he wanted anything in return. If you can't understand that kind of decency, then I feel sorry for you." She walked away with her head high, leaving Jessica and her friends speechless at their table. But Sophia knew the damage was done. The seeds of gossip had been planted, and in a small town like Cedar Creek, they would grow quickly. The afternoon classes passed in a blur of sideways glances and whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. By the time Jake picked her up after school, Sophia felt emotionally exhausted. How was it? He asked, though one look at her face probably told him everything he needed to know. Complicated, Sophia said simply. Jake waited until they were back at the ranch before pressing for details. They sat on the front porch while Scout chased rabbits in the yard, and Sophia told him about the confrontation in the cafeteria. Jake's jaw tightened as she spoke, and by the end of her recitation, his hands were clenched into fists. Those little, he started, then caught himself. I should have expected this. Small towns, people love to talk. I'm sorry, Sophia said quietly. I've brought trouble to your life. Maybe I should. Don't. Jake's voice was sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare apologize for other people's small minds. And don't you dare think about leaving because some teenagers decided to be cruel. Sophia looked at him in surprise. She'd seen Jake angry before at broken equipment, at bureaucratic red tape, at the insurance company that had tried to lowball him after the storm damage. But this was different. This was protective fury, the kind of anger that came from someone threatening family. People are going to talk no matter what we do, Jake continued. The question is, are we going to let their talk determine how we live our lives? Over the next few weeks, Sophia gradually found her place at Cedar Creek High. The initial hostility faded into grudging acceptance, helped along by her academic performance and her quiet dignity in the face of continued gossip. She made a few friends, mostly other students who were outsiders in their own ways, and discovered that she loved chemistry with an intensity that surprised her teacher. You should think about studying chemical engineering in college, Mr. Thompson told her after she aced another test. With grades like these, you could get into any program in the state. Sophia smiled but didn't mention that college felt like an impossible dream. Even with Jake's help, even with the lawyer's cautious optimism about her immigration case, the future remained uncertain. At home, she and Jake fell into an easy routine that felt increasingly natural. Sophia would cook dinner while Jake finished his evening chores, and they'd eat together on the porch when the weather was nice, talking about their days, about books Sophia was reading, about Jake's plans for expanding the ranch's renewable energy systems. You know, Jake said one evening as they watched the sunset, I've been thinking about hiring some help. The ranch is doing well enough to support a couple of employees, and I'm not getting any younger. Sophia looked at him curiously. Jake was hardly old, though the lines around his eyes and the gray threading through his dark hair made him look older than his years. Pete's a good foreman, but he's talking about retiring next year. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands the land and cares about the animals. Sophia waited, sensing that he was building up to something important. The thing is, Jake continued carefully, the person I trust most is sitting right here. You've learned more about ranching in 4 months than most people learn in years. You care about this place, about the cattle, about doing things right. Sophia's heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying that when you graduate, if you want it, there's a job here for you. Not charity, not temporary help. A real job, with real pay. The kind that could support someone while they figure out their next steps. Sophia stared at him, barely able to process what she was hearing. You want me to stay? Jake turned to look at her directly. Sophia, these past few months, this place has felt like home again. Not just a house where I sleep and eat, but a real home. You've brought life back to it, brought purpose back to my work. If you want to stay, if you want to build something here, then yes, I want you to stay. Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes. What about people's talk? What about the gossip? Jake shrugged. Let them talk. We know the truth. That's all that matters. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up the driveway. Sophia looked up to see Sheriff Martinez's patrol car, and her stomach clenched with familiar fear. Even now, months later, the sight of law enforcement filled her with anxiety. But Sheriff Martinez was smiling as he approached the porch, and he was carrying what looked like official documents. Evening, Jake. Sophia. Hope I'm not interrupting. Anything important? What can we do for you, Sheriff? Jake stood up, his body tense with protective instincts. Actually, it's what I can do for Sophia. Sheriff Martinez handed her an envelope with an official seal. Your lawyer asked me to deliver this personally. Seems your immigration case has been approved. Congratulations, young lady. You're officially a legal resident of the United States. Sophia stared at the documents in her hands, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. Legal resident. The phrase seemed too good to be true, too wonderful to be real. This means ... she whispered. This means you can stay, Jake said quietly. This means you can make real plans, real choices about your future. Sophia laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy that seemed to echo across the prairie. I can stay. I can really stay. Sheriff Martinez tipped his hat and headed back to his car, leaving Sophia and Jake alone with the magnitude of the moment. Sophia looked at the legal documents, then at Jake, then at the ranch spread out before them in the golden evening light. So, Jake said eventually, what do you think? Ready to be a permanent Texan? Sophia wiped her eyes and smiled at him, the man who had saved her, who had given her not just shelter but hope, not just safety but a chance to dream again. I think, she said, I'm ready to be home. That night, Sophia lay in Emma's room, her room now, and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening quiet. Esperanza rustled softly in her cage, the cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere in the house, she could hear Jake moving around, probably reading in his study, as he did every night. 6 months ago, she had been a frightened girl with nothing but $47 and a prayer. Tonight, she was a legal resident with a high school diploma within reach, a job waiting for her, and something she'd never expected to find again: a family. Not the family she'd been born into, not the family she'd lost in the storm, but the family she and Jake had chosen to become. It wasn't conventional. It wasn't what anyone would have predicted, but it was real, and it was theirs. Sophia pulled out her mother's rosary and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for her legal status or her safety, but for the unexpected ways that life could surprise you, for the way that loss and love could coexist, for the way that helping someone else could heal your own broken places. Outside her window, the Texas sky stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of stars and possibilities. Tomorrow, she would go to school and ace her chemistry test. Next month, she would graduate. Next year, she would start her job as assistant ranch manager, learning every aspect of the business from Jake. And someday, maybe, she would go to college after all. Jake had already started talking about correspondence, courses, and night programs, about ways to pursue her dreams without leaving the ranch that had become her anchor. The future stretched ahead of her, uncertain but no longer frightening. She had found her place in the world, had found people who valued her, not for what she could give them, but for who she was. The girl who had been left behind after the storm had finally found her way home. 2 years later, Sophia adjusted her cap and gown for the 10th time, peering out the window of the community college's preparation room. In the parking lot, she could see Jake's familiar pickup truck, and her heart swelled with pride and affection. Sophia Morales, a volunteer with a clipboard, appeared at her elbow. You're up next for the keynote speech. Sophia nodded, smoothing down her valedictorian medal. At 19, she was graduating with a 2-year degree in agricultural science, earned through night classes and weekend intensives, while working full-time at the Morrison Ranch. It had been exhausting and exhilarating. Proof that dreams deferred didn't have to be dreams denied. The ranch was thriving under her and Jake's joint management. They'd expanded into sustainable agriculture, organic beef production, and agritourism, becoming a model for modern ranching practices. Sophia had even started a small program providing internships for other young immigrants, teaching them practical skills while they navigated their own legal processes. As she walked toward the stage, Sophia thought about the speech she'd prepared, about resilience and second chances, and the power of unexpected kindness. But mostly, she thought about Jake, sitting in the audience with tears of pride in his eyes, and about how sometimes the most important family was the one you chose. The storm had taken everything from her, but it had also led her home. And that, Sophia thought as she stepped up to the podium, was the most miraculous thing of all. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.